Hello everyone, thanks for joining us and welcome to the first of this podcast series where we'll be discussing the mental and emotional well-being of Christians. I am Dr. Anthea Yali. The idea for this project came about when myself and 4 friends who also work in the health and care profession deliberated on the common issues that confront people who are affected by mental health conditions and the impact that this has on their day-to-day lives. Being Christians, we were all too aware of the peculiar challenges this poses for both the sufferer and the church community, including the leadership. These discussions led to a project called the Mental Health in Churches Awareness Project, or the MHICA project. As part of this project, a survey was conducted to gather the views of a few church-going Christians to gauge the level of awareness and support provided for sufferers of depression, anxiety, and mental stress. So in this podcast series, the real-life experience of a sufferer is captured. In addition, the responses of people who participated in the survey, as well as an educative aspect, both medical and faith-based, delivered by a consultant psychiatrist, is featured. We also have on our team a pastor who will touch on examples of good work already being done by other people and groups in relation to mental health in churches, and share ideas on what support can be given to and provided by the church, with a special emphasis on churches with a large Black and minority ethnic representation in the UK. So, this is where we introduce ourselves, the MHICA Group.
My name is Dr. Lawrence Edubuating.
My name is Dr. Brenda Adokwashi.
Hello, hi, I'm Pastor Samuel Forichere.
I'm Dr. Anthea Yali.
Hello, my name is Dr. Daniel Bolute.
I'm an associate specialist pediatrician.
I'm a public health and education consultant.
I'm a GP in Kent.
I am a specialty doctor in respiratory medicine, working in an NHS hospital in Belfast.
In my work life, I work as a consultant child adolescent psychiatrist. I'm also the clinical director for the Belfast Trust Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services.
I fellowship at the Vine Maidstone in Kent.
I'm a pastor with the Faith World TV.
And a worship leader at the Living Flames Baptist Church in London.
I attend church at the Potter's House Christian Fellowship, Belfast branch.
I am a Christian and I'm also a deacon in Windsor Baptist Church, which is where I fellowship and based in Belfast with my family.
Are you a Christian or do you attend church? Have you or someone you know felt so low or depressed that even God felt so far away? Join us in this series of talks as we explore the condition, depression in the lives of Christians.
Dan, it's great to have you on our team.
Thank you.
You being the specialist in mental health, I think I would like you to give us an overview of what mental illness is all about.
Thank you very much, Brenda. It's really great to be here myself.
Yeah.
Now, the World Health Organization defines good health as not merely the absence of disease, but a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Of the three, physical illness can easily be felt and seen, and immediate treatment can be offered. Credit to modern-day scientific advancement. Social ill health, however, is often difficult to define, even though we all have an idea or knowledge of what it is and also its pervasiveness in society as a whole. Mental or emotional illness is often very difficult and is to see, and is often is hidden, and therefore a silent killer, and also carries with it a huge amount of stigma.
Can imagine, yeah.
There are many different types of mental illnesses, and I'll be going on to explain some of these later on.
Right.
The most common types are depression, anxiety, phobia, obsessions and compulsions, hypomania or mania, and also schizophrenia.
So, what exactly should our viewers be expecting in this series, Dan?
It's important to know that mental illness can affect anyone. The presentations also vary from person to person in terms of severity and also the degree of impact on the lives of the sufferer or on the lives of sufferers. The most common ones that we are going to look at in this program are depression and anxiety.
Right.
So in this program, we are hoping to discuss and focus on the common types of mental illnesses, their causes, who they affect, how they present, what their impacts are, and then also the outcome from the illness. We'll also be looking at what to do, especially as Christians, when we or someone close to us or someone we know is going through mental or emotional illness, and what the roles and responsibilities of the church, our families and friends need to be.
Right.
And also to look at some of the reasons why people also suffer in silence.
I know this education material is for everyone, but we are mainly focusing on the Christian community. Is the Christian immune from this particular these illnesses at all?
Yes, that's a very good question, Brenda. Christians and non-Christians alike can suffer from depression. So Christians are not immune from emotional problems. As Christians, we believe that we live in a fallen world and we are all under the influence of the same laws of nature. Christians and non-Christians are therefore prone to adversity, including ill health and the daily struggles of life. Oftentimes, Christians believe that physical or emotional or psychological ill health are the result of spiritual weakness or sin or faithlessness or a combination of these. We all know of a story that is told in John chapter 9, verse 1 to 3, where Jesus met the blind man and healed the blind man.
Yeah.
The first question that his disciples asked him was, Master, who sinned? Was it this man's parents or was it somebody else's sin? Christ then went on to say, no, it is nobody's sin that this man was born blind.
Right.
I believe that this idea that emotional illness or ill health is the result of some underlying sin or weakness is oftentimes still either consciously or subconsciously held by some Christians. The Bible does not conceal the frailties of our heroes. And we know that the Bible is full of examples of people who have experienced adversities whilst walking with God. And therefore, the fact that you are walking with God, you are a Christian, doesn't, mean that you are immune from mental or emotional illness. We know of the story of Job in the Old Testament, where a very upright man and a righteous man went through severe adversity. And that's a story that is well known to many Christians. We know of Paul in the New Testament, who talk about the thorn in his flesh, to which he cried many times to the Lord to take away. And then when we come to the Lord Jesus himself, the Lord himself showed his grief and agony and anguish whilst he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, whilst he was going to face the cross. So suffering, therefore, is part of being human. What is important, and I want to state that what's important for Christians to know, is the knowledge and the understanding that God does not and will not abandon us whilst we are going through difficult times and suffering. It's something that we all need to use to encourage ourselves whilst we are going through emotional difficulties.
Right. Am I right in thinking as a Christian that surely the devil must have a role to play in this? Is that right?
Yes, sometimes it's difficult to kind of make that direct extrapolation. But as believers, the Bible, says that we are not ignorant of the devices of the devil. In 1 Peter 5, verse 8, we are told that the devil is our adversary, prowls about like a roaring lion, seeking who to devour.
Yeah.
In John 10, we also read that the enemy, that's the devil, cometh not, but to steal, to kill, and to destroy. The devil is therefore constantly working and to find ways to steal our joy, kill our faith and hope, and to destroy our love and trust for the Lord. One of the easiest ways for him to achieve this purpose is through illness and adversity.
Right.
It is therefore important for the Christian to learn to depend on the grace of God while going through suffering. Our God has promised us, and this is very important, that wherever we are, he is going to be with us. He's promised us that when we are in the fire or deep in the depths of the sea, he will still be with us. And therefore, while he's going through suffering, his promise to be with us still holds true. Suffering, and for our purpose, emotional difficulties, is not the result of personal sin, weakness, or faithlessness. I want to emphasize that point again, but that God has promised to be with us and to see us through when we go through or when we are exposed to suffering and adversity.
Now, friends, we are very fortunate to have a real life experience of a depression sufferer. And she was very kind enough to speak to Anthea. For the purposes of this podcast, she would like to be known as a Melody. Shall we go to her and see and hear what she has to say?
Hi, Melody. Thanks for joining us and thanks for sharing your story with us today. We are truly blessed to have you here with us. Can you please introduce yourself?
Thanks for allowing me to share my experience. I am Melody. I'm in my late 40s. I'm married with children and I work in the health sector.
So we are confirming that you do have a diagnosis of depression. Is that right?
Yes, I do. I had symptoms of depression for about 2 to 3 years before I mustered courage to go and see my GP, and I was diagnosed later on.
So can you tell us briefly what life was like, before the diagnosis?
Well, I come from West Africa. I have been a Christian since I was in secondary school. I was a very outgoing person, and I used to hang out with people who would describe me as a very bubbly person. I was very active and loved the music ministry in church. So I always slotted myself into the choir wherever I went. I was also involved in Christian outreach programs in university. So in summary, I was a very happy person to be with.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. Okay. So tell me how you met,
I met and fell in love with my husband, who was a Christian or is still a Christian, and we got engaged and subsequently got married. I joined him in the UK, and later I settled into the life in the UK very quickly. We attended church together. I joined the choir, and yes, life was going good.
So yeah, now you're married.
When we decided to start a family, it took quite a few years to conceive. Those were quite stressful times. I felt very sorry for myself all the time. I remember tears filling my eyes when I saw people playing with their own children.
It was painful, was it?
Painful, yeah. But with family and friends backing us up in prayer, God blessed us miraculously with our first child.
That's great.
So it was soon after I gave birth to my first child that I recall one of the health visitors came to visit, and I mentioned to her I was feeling low. She did give me a questionnaire to answer, but I believe I did not fulfill the criteria for referral. So she advised I keep watching things and then get back to her if there are any
issues. Okay. So you knew who to contact if you had any problems then? Okay.
I did.
That is great.
Right. So what is depression and how does it come about, Dan? I know we all have moments where we feel low, we don't feel quite right in ourselves. At which point will you say this is just low mood, and at which point does it tip into depression?
That's a very good question, Brenda, and thanks for asking that question. Like you rightly said, we all go through moments of feeling low in our mood, down and sad, when we are upset or when something happened or when we are disappointed about something. These could last for hours or days, but these tend to go away without having much impact on our day-to-day functioning. Depression becomes an illness when the feelings of low mood goes on for days, many days of the week, or for several weeks, and sometimes for months or even years.
Right.
Okay. Plus, in addition to it being pervasive or staying on for days on end, in addition to that, it starts to affect the day-to-day functioning of the sufferer.
Right.
Now, when we move into this phase, we begin to say that it is no longer just a passing low mood, but it has become an illness.
Right.
So in addition to the low mood, the impact that it begins to have on the sufferer to various degrees then makes it or tips it into the domain of an illness.
I see. So are there any causes or factors that lead to depression, please?
Thank you. As we mentioned, depression can affect anyone. How and what causes depression is through the interaction of nature, which is our body's constitution, our genetics, and other things, and then environmental factors.
Right.
So it's a combination or interaction between these two that we use to try and understand what contribute to one having a depressive illness or an episode. It is, however, important to say that when it comes to the actual cause, we actually do not know what causes depression.
Right.
Okay, so or another way of putting this is that the cause of depression cannot be linked to a particular cause or a particular situation, but there are many factors that could contribute into tipping somebody into a depressive illness. Now, even though we do not know the actual causes of depression, there are many risk factors that are linked to developing depressive illness. Now, these factors can be grouped into what we call physical or biological factors, emotional or psychological factors, and also social factors.
Right.
These factors come together in a complex mix to give us a person's unique predisposing, precipitating, perpetuating, and prognostic factors in the onset and the progression and outcome of the illness. I know I have used many big words.
I was
in
just
this,
going to say, yes.
but I'm going to explain what these stand for. When we talk of the predisposing factors, this will include things like a person's genetics or family, history, socioeconomic background, exposure to early life trauma, all of these things which predate the depression or which the person has been exposed to well before they got depressed are called the predisposing factors. So they predate the depression.
The depression itself, right.
Then when somebody becomes depressed, it could be the cause of something that has happened just preceding or just immediate to the onset of the depression. And these are what we call the precipitating factors. And this will include events or things, what we call that tip the person over the edge into the depression. For example, stressful life events like loss of employment, the death of a close relative,
Right.
domestic violence.
Yeah.
For young people, bullying in young people is a very important, precipitating factor. But it's important also to say that depression can hit from nowhere without, any noticeable, antecedent or immediate preceding, event. Then we move on to what we call the perpetuating factors, and these can also be called the factors that go on to maintain, the illness. And these are the factors that, in addition to some of the ones mentioned above, some of the factors continue from, if you take the precipitating events like the loss or bereavement or other things, or the bullying, this can be ongoing
Right.
in the life of the person. Right. So factors continuing within the life of the person, and then also there are certain habits the sufferer undertakes that go on to promote or that keeps the illness going.
Right.
For example, when people get depressed, they start drinking or taking alcohol. Alcohol, we know, is a depressant. So the person might think, I am drinking alcohol to help relieve the symptoms of depression. But the alcohol then goes on to promote or to cause the depression to continue.
Right.
When people are depressed, one of the things they feel like doing is isolating themselves from everybody in society. But we know that the more people isolate themselves, the more that goes to contribute to the ongoing, of the illness. So those are the examples of things that maintain the illness. And when we come to the treatment, we will be talking about how this can then be broken or how this can be managed. And then the last thing is about the prognostic factors. And these are things within the person or in their environment that promote or reduce good outcome. For example, a good supportive network of family members is known to promote good outcome. Good, close, knitted, supportive family and friends is known to promote good outcome, and also vice versa, in this situation. Now, back to, as I mentioned earlier, we talk about the physical, psychological, and social factors that contribute to depression. And I'm going to explain this a little bit, in this situation. When we talk of the physical risk factors, people who are going through prolonged illnesses or certain chronic medical conditions, are known to, suffer from depression, are known to have depression, just from the long, term effect
of the illness,
of those illnesses.
Right.
For example, another physical condition that is commonly associated with depression is when we have underactive thyroid. In the body, we have a gland in our neck, which we call the thyroid gland, and it produces some hormones that, maintains our body's physiology and keeps our mood, stable. When this gland is underproducing, that hormone is lacking. And people who suffer from underactive thyroid, go on to develop, depression.
So it's part of the underactive thyroid disease. Okay.
Yeah. And then people who are going through other prolonged illnesses like diabetes, or people who have suffered heart attack or cancer, are all physical conditions that are known to be associated, with depression. In some people, just going through the winter months is known to associate or to be associated with depression, and we call this the seasonal affective, disorder. And in women, sometimes menstrual or hormonal changes can also cause depression or be associated with depression. As I mentioned, it's not a cause, but it is linked to, known to be linked to depression. Then we talk about the psychological risk factors. Depression illness can occur from nowhere or may follow a major life event, such as a loss, like the death of somebody, a bereavement, a rejection from a loved one. In young people, when people, get, jilted or split from their boyfriends or girlfriends, that can tip people into depression. And these are all, and other traumatic life events are known to be linked to depression. Depression can be linked to an adverse life event. Other factors that can affect how we are prone to depression will include things like, early life, events or early life traumatic life events. Repressed anger is also known to be linked to depression. Loss of a close loved one, when people are very young is known to be linked to depression in later life. People who have been exposed to early life or childhood trauma, such as emotional or physical or sexual abuse,
Right.
are also known to be prone.
Yeah.
You know, they have an increased risk or propensity to developing depression.
I see. Are there any psychological factors as well?
Yeah. The psychological factors are those that I've mentioned, the bereavement, the loss, the rejection, and all of those things. But then I'm going to talk about the social, factors.
Yes.
And the social vulnerabilities will include people who have family history, people who come from deprived environment, people who have been neglected or abused, people with marital disharmony, stressful family relationship, poverty, poor socioeconomic environment, unemployment.
Yeah.
All of these things are social things that are known to increase your risk of developing depression. And if you kind of think about that in the natural society,
Yeah.
in my line of work, we see more and more people presenting with depression from people who come from more the socio-economic deprived areas
Right.
of inner city, communities. Poor supportive network for people who have migrated from Africa, or if you talk about the BAME community, most of us would have come from our own indigenous, background. Africa or Caribbean or elsewhere. And what we do know is that there is increased risk of depression in people in these communities or these people, and some of it is linked to just the struggle of trying to settle into this culture.
Yeah.
Coming here, trying to settle your family, getting work. Some people are doing 3, 4, 5 jobs, a day to make ends meet. And sometimes it's purely trying to understand this culture and how we cope with the day-to-day events, of this culture. So that's kind of my broad, understanding of some of the things that lead on to the causative risk factors of depression.
That's quite elaborate, and it's a lot of factors in the environments that can affect people like us. Like you said, there's a lot of support when you are like those who come from Africa, for instance. There's a lot of support looking after your children and everything else. But you come here and there's very little support. So
You're right.
I can understand why people will go into those situations. Thank you so much. Daniel, I know we all have got different personalities and temperaments, really. My question is, does every sufferer present in the same way? Every sufferer of depression presents in the same way?
Now, thank you for that question. Now, I'll start by saying the main symptoms of depression are low mood, loss of interest, loss of energy, loss of enjoyment in things that the person used to enjoy or things that were of interest to the person. Then there's also poor concentration and sometimes complain of feeling tired all the time. These may be associated, or in addition to this, we can have complete loss of appetite or overeating. So in depression, people can swing to either losing their appetite completely, or people tend to overeat. And sometimes we describe that as comfort eating.
Right.
There's also people lose sleep. So, sleep, either sleep goes very poor, that people are not able to sleep, or they sleep excessively. So you can see that the extreme, and then sometimes with sleep also, people wake up and don't feel rested after sleep. And in severe cases, the sufferers can start getting feelings of life not worth living, and sometimes suicidal thoughts or wishes to be dead. And your question is whether everybody suffers or present the same way.
Yeah.
The simple answer is that depression presents in varying levels of severity, and the main we can split the severity into mild, moderate, and severe. Okay. So their presentation or the impact on the sufferer varies according to the severity
Right.
of the illness.
Right.
So people who are presenting at the mild end of the spectrum, even though we have a cluster of the symptoms that I mentioned above,
Yeah.
people on the mild end of the spectrum are still able to go about their day-to-day activities. But one of the things is that at that mild end, people are aware and they feel they are struggling to deal with these day-to-day activities.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Then at the severe end of the spectrum, people stop functioning. They stop going to work. They take to their beds. They stop interacting with their families. And then people just become completely withdrawn from society. So that is the severe end of the spectrum. Right. So in terms of, depending upon the severity, we will see the various impacts, based upon the severity. And I talk about the mild and the severe end. The moderate end is anything in between the mild and the moderate. So
Right.
persons struggling and sometimes not functioning properly, but they are kind of swinging maybe in between,
yeah.
the two broad phases. And that's how the impact or sufferers differ.
Right.
And that's based upon the severity and the presentation of their illness.
I see. So do people always progress from mild to moderate to severe, or somebody can just present with a severe illness out of the blue?
Yeah, that's it. That is a very difficult question to answer. And my simple thoughts or explanation of that is sometimes some people, the first time they present might present with severe form of illness, but it might be difficult to tease out whether they have kind of overlooked the mild end of the illness, and just got tipped into
trying
the
to
severe.
cope them with
they
the
might
illness.
have been coping okay, and then managing things okay. Then they present as a severe illness.
Right.
So it's difficult to kind of say, But yes, people sometimes the first time they present or know something is really not right is with severe illness or severe disease. Of presentation. Yeah.
I see. Are there any other symptoms at all? This looks like a very vast. It affects you in every sense of the word, really.
Yeah. Apart from the main symptoms mentioned above or earlier on, discussed, we talk about people feeling sad most of the time. Feels like crying, but sometimes unable to cry. They feel like they don't have energy or interest, to doing anything. They're unable to concentrate. Everything becomes a chore virtually.
Right.
And then sometimes there's feeling of inadequacy in one's own, strengths and things that people are used to. In others, people start feeling constantly angry, or feeling very irritable and easily frustrated all the time. The person who presents with this angry and irritable and frustrated easily becomes difficult to live with by family, and friends. And sometimes people just don't know what they've done. They feel they have offended the person. They feel, they are doing something wrong. So the sufferer, becomes quite difficult to live with by family, and friends. And oftentimes people feel like they are walking on eggshells around the person. And sometimes people become completely withdrawn from society and cut themselves off completely from family and friends. Now, the severity can also be linked to people becoming paranoid. And what do I mean by paranoia?
Yeah.
This is when people feel overly suspicious of others and situations, and also they believe that people are out watching them and people are out to hurt them, and people are out to harm them all the time. So you can see how that can contribute to people trying to separate themselves from other people. And in some situations, people start to hear voices. That is at the extreme end of the spectrum. People start to hear voices. We call these auditory hallucinations. They hear voices, putting them down, telling, saying negative things about them. But as I said, that's at the severe end, of the spectrum. Voices might be telling person, you are useless, you don't deserve to live, you deserve to kill yourself, why don't you go and kill yourself? You are a burden on society. All of this can be, voices heard by people who are going through severe form of illness. And sometimes people, go on to start believing that they are a burden on other people and they are better off dead, than alive. The symptoms of depression could also include what we call the biological symptoms. I've mentioned some of this already,
Right.
but this will include the loss of appetite, the weight loss, or excessive appetite or weight gain,
Yeah.
sleep difficulties. With sometimes people tend to wake up very early in the morning. They say 3, 4 a.m. People are up and they can't go back to sleep. So that's early morning waking, and some people just sleep, too much. Others feel, fatigued, that's tired most of the time. People feel agitated, restless, as people feel, completely slowed down or retarded. There's loss of interest and also poor concentration, guilt feelings, or sometimes thoughts of suicide or wishes to be dead can also be very common symptoms, in depression. For some Christians, for people with Christian beliefs, there could be a particular problem with the Bible appearing irrelevant, prayer a pointless exercise, and God seeming to be very far away, or sometimes people begin to doubt in the very existence of God himself. So these are some of the the broad range of symptoms. I have repeated some of them in the discussion, but it is just to emphasize how vast the symptoms of depression can be. Thank you.
This is not a condition to take lightly at all, and it's really what you told us really very informative. Shall we go back to Melody and see how she's coping?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so you mentioned low mood soon after you had your child. What happened next with the mood?
As the years went by, the low mood would recur. It was always getting worse, especially during the winter months. And also during extra stresses, such as looking for childcare for my child while I was at work. I also noticed a pattern of low mood, anxiety, and feeling unsure about the future, feeling scared that I will not be alive or be there for my family. The depression actually got progressively intense with time.
Okay, all right. So you mentioned your mood got worse over the winter.
Yes, it did.
Time.
It did. The remarkable thing was the fact that once the weather became brighter, my mood also got better.
Okay. So how did the diagnosis come about then?
Well, I eventually mustered courage to see my GP after putting it off for a long time. Yeah.
Why did you put it off?
I was afraid of the implications of the diagnosis and the effect it would have on my future employment.
Okay, so work was your biggest fear then?
It really was. Yeah.
So what did the GP do for you?
So my GP asked me a few questions and referred me for counseling. I did some counseling sessions for a while, and it was good to have somebody to talk to. But after a while, I felt I wasn't getting anywhere. And the symptoms kept recurring. So my GP recommended medications at one point.
Okay, so when your GP recommended the medications, how did you feel about that?
I wasn't very keen on the antidepressants because I was hoping that things would get better without them.
Okay, so by now you'd been without them for how long?
Approximately 5 years, I would say. It took me quite a long time to make that decision.
But I guess you said sometimes you had good mood for some time.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I think mine was quite seasonal. So during spring and summer, I felt a lot better than during winter and autumn.
So it's not as long as it sounds.
Yeah.
Usually it could go on for 6 months.
So how are you still on medication at the moment?
Yes, I am. I've been on medication for about 10 years or so now.
So Daniel, Melody was diagnosed with depression. I know we've talked about the symptoms and the causes, etc.
Yes.
But I just want us to hone down on the impact of this condition, please.
Thank you very much. So depression is the only illness that affects every bit of the person's existence. It affects the self, where the self feels worthless. It affects our view of the world, which feels meaningless. It affects our view of the future, which feels hopeless. Now, all of these, coming together, contribute to extreme feelings of hopelessness. And in severe cases, people begin to have suicidal thinking or wishes, to be dead. And sometimes people, are driven, to suicide from severe, depression. The impact of depression for the sufferer is far-reaching, or can be far-reaching, and can be very devastating. It has impact on the persons, their work, their family, their children, their spouses, their friends, and every bit of the person in society, at large. Oftentimes, because depression is an illness that nobody sees, people think it is one of those things. I really want to emphasize that it is not one of those things. In my understanding of illnesses, depression is a very severe form of an illness. Even though we have mild, moderate, and severe, its impact is still can be very far-reaching. And depression is the only illness that affects, I would say, every aspect of the person's or the sufferer's very existence or very being, as it were.
This is really insightful, Dan. I'm really keen to find out how it really affected Melody. Shall we go back to her and see what she has to say?
Well, thanks again, Melody, for being so brave to share your story with us because of your love for God and for man, I guess. What about the people around you? What was the impact on them? Where do you want to start?
Well, I'd like to start with my lovely children. They were the immediate people around me. I would say they probably lost their mother, their jovial, loving mother, during those episodes. As I said earlier, I became easily irritated, especially with them, shouting on them unnecessarily. I could not show much interest in their daily lives and activities, homework, etc. I was not interested in getting them ready for school. And I never saw the funny side of any jokes they shared. And I was actually glad to see them leave for school, as that meant that I was going to be left alone at home with my own thoughts. I couldn't even bring myself to discipline them when they were being naughty. And I must say they got away with murder.
But do you think they were aware of what was going on with you?
Yes, I remember my older child, who was by then a teenager, came to my room and asked me, "Mommy, what is wrong with you?" I remained silent, and all I remember was she just put her arms around me, very understandingly.
So you've spoken about, the effect on your children, the relationship between you and your children. We'll come to, the man of the house, because you're married, your husband. How did you see him in all of this?
Well, I felt as if I was a failure in my marriage. I felt like my husband had regretted marrying me. It was like he was frustrated and disappointed with me, was what I was thinking. I did not see myself as a helpmate, as the Bible wants us to be, in our marriages. Communication was very minimal, and I was aware that when he tried to speak to me, all he got from me was complaining, moaning about stuff and negative vibes. Sex was virtually non-existent. Even our usual hugs and kisses, often witnessed by our children, disappeared completely during those times.
Okay. So Did he try to address your mood problem at all?
He definitely did. He tried to hold things together. He used to run the home as best as he could because of the way I was feeling. And I think he understood, and he was doing all the rounds, the shopping, the chores, the school runs.
So he was very supportive, and I'm sure he was juggling his own work as well.
He was. So at a point, I could see that it was a bit too much for him, and his frustrations came through.
Was he able to speak to you that, I think you are depressed, or mention mood? I mean, did you talk directly in that way?
We did. Probably indirectly, but we did. We knew that this was what was going on with me. However, I could tell that he was taking steps to help me out of the mood, and also trying to sort himself out because it was having an effect on him.
Okay. Welcome to Melody's husband here with us. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us to share your side of Melody's story with us. How would you like us to address you?
You can call me Mr. K or K.
All right.
And I want to thank you for the opportunity given me.
Mr. K, you are the closest to Melody, really. When did you start noticing that things weren't quite right with her?
First, let me see. My wife is a hard-working, up and about lady. She's the first to wake up every morning, will make pancakes for the family, do her utmost to get everyone to have a good start for the day. She took a year's break from work after her last child, and when she resumed work, she found it quite a challenge shuffling between her work and being the mother she wanted to be at the same time. This affected her performance at work badly, and she would come home feeling terribly worn out and low in spirit. I noticed that she was not singing as she used to every morning in bed, and then she started to withdraw. She wouldn't want to go to church, she wouldn't go out, and lots of things. And then she would prefer to stay in bed all day.
So what was going on in your mind then?
At first, I thought she was being lazy. I felt it was a behavior issue and that it was a decision she had made. But in as much as I tried to be positive and to encourage her, I realized that the more I spoke, the more annoying it sounded in her ears. I was confused and couldn't stop thinking. But I felt I had to be strong for the family.
Okay.
Things, some of which were dreadful. I knew, however, that she was not in control of herself, nor of her thoughts. And our first solution was to go on our knees in prayer.
When this was going on, did you feel or wish that you had help? And, what sort of help, if that is the...
Yeah, I knew we needed help. As Christians, our first point of call was prayer. We spoke to our head pastor about it, and he paid us several visits, engaging us in several conversations and prayers. I also sought advice from another senior minister and trained counselor. He brought my attention to the disease and recommended some books for me to read to enable me gain a better understanding of how Melody was feeling. He also checked on me periodically and eventually invited us over to his church for a prayer session. You know what? You cannot deal with this situation on your own. It has a detrimental effect on the whole family.
Your wife spoke very highly of you, saying you basically had to run everything when she couldn't. But she did make mention that from her perspective, she felt like whenever you tried to either communicate with her or support her with things, that she was always moaning, complaining, and that all you got from her were like negative vibes. Is this true? Is this how you saw it?
You have to know your wife, and you need to understand that what is happening to her is out of her control. The worst you can do is to talk her down. Blame her for the effort she makes, ignore her, allow her to stay in bed all the time. You know, I had to remain strong and try to keep the kids happy. I tried to play loud gospel music, get her from bed so we go to church, and a number of other things. And I didn't want her to stay away from God. I had to reassure her of scripture every now and then. But she didn't want any of those. But I persisted because I knew I had to get her to start thinking positive.
Yeah. Okay. So really, you were playing your role as the Christian husband, making sure she was still in touch with God. Yeah.
As best as I could, but I wasn't sure if I was getting anywhere.
Okay. All right. How did it affect the children?
You know, kids are smarter than we think, and they could sense something wrong, but they couldn't figure out what it was. So they took it as mom is sick, not well, and tried to get on with life. There was an obvious separation or gap between mother and children. They couldn't concentrate at school and couldn't understand why she pushed them away. I had to explain things to them and ask them to allow their mother to rest. I did a lot to try and cheer them up, and I persisted in sharing and encouraging my wife rather than ignore or stay away from her, which is what she wanted. You know, Joshua chapter 1 verse 8 and Isaiah chapter 41 verse 10 were scriptures that I used a lot to encourage my wife. I'm so grateful to my counselor. Without him, I would not have been able to cope or know what to do.
So this just shows that how important counseling is, doesn't it? Somebody to help.
Yes, you can't do this on your own, and you need help. And the more, I would say, qualified or professional the help, the better, really.
Okay. Were there any comments, that you still keep in mind from maybe relatives or close friends that you would like to share?
Yes, it's interesting you mentioned that. And yes, one relative was so concerned about her and kept asking if perhaps one of us had offended her, as she did not understand her moodiness and desire to keep away from people. I have a friend, also a husband, who went through a similar experience with his wife and expressed he didn't know what to do.
It's very complicated, isn't it?
It was a very difficult situation.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Everybody around, not just the person. Yeah.
I think people don't realize it doesn't affect one person, really. It affects all the people around them and the people around them also. So it's not really, the disease itself is individual, but its effects are really,
yes,
they go beyond the individual involved. Yes.
Thanks so much for sharing with us. But is there any final message or comment you would like to give, maybe for somebody who finds themselves in your situation? You may have gone through it, and learned along the way, but somebody may be now coming into that kind of situation. Or what advice do you have before you leave us today?
It is important to know that anyone going through a period of depression, they already have low self-esteem, they have a feeling of unworthiness, and they are low in confidence. And as such, they do not want to talk much. Nothing interests them at all. It is very easy for those around him or her to think that they are being avoided because of what they might have said or done. And others may try to argue with him or her and blame him or her when things don't go well. It is vital to give him or her all the help and support you can muster. Be positive, pray a lot, and sing praises all the time. Seek professional help and talk to your pastor about it. These are trained people who handle your case with the strictest of confidence.
Well, thank you so much by sharing with us in order to help all of us, because this affects us all. And it's great that we were able to have you here with us. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you too, and thank you for sharing this to help other people. Someone might see this and it will encourage them to seek help early or help them to negotiate the difficult situation they're in. So I really also appreciate what you're doing.
Okay, great. So Melody, please tell us how work was affected.
It got to a point where I was quite scared to go to work. Firstly, because I had to be amongst people, and also the motivation and confidence was not there. When I was able to drag myself to work, my concentration and memory was poor. It took me much longer to complete tasks. And I was always worried that I was going to make a mistake in one thing or the other. And I was scared that it would lead to dismissal at any point if the situation was grave. My mind kept telling me to quit my job, and it did happen quite a lot of times.
So I'm sure your colleagues must have noticed something different about you at work. What was their reaction?
I'm sure they did. Some of them commented on the fact that I had lost a lot of weight, and on the fact that I also was a bit more quiet and subdued than my usual self.
Okay. Did you find any sources of support at work?
I definitely did. Managers and immediate bosses were quite supportive. I was quite fortunate. So I informed my immediate line manager, who had a listening ear for me and advised that I go to occupational health. I was also allowed time off, work during those periods where I could not just bring myself to go to work. They also adapted things at work to accommodate my needs. Occupational health recommended that I saw my GP and also seek counseling.
Okay. So really, they gave you really good, support from work, didn't they? And they were supportive.
They're very supportive.
That is really great. And they gave you good advice by directing you to your GP as well.
They did.
Okay, all right.
From what we've discussed so far, I could tell that this illness has a huge impact on the entire life of the person. Now, we are family people. And so the family is really affected when it comes to this condition because they are the close people who are around the person. Now, can you kindly elaborate a little bit more on the impact of the family?
No, thank you very much. And as in the discussion, we talk about the direct impact on the person, and on the person, we talk about person's relationships are affected, to a very large extent. And we know that depression affects the performance of the person, not just at work or other areas, but also the performance of the person within the family.
Right.
And that is a huge, something that is so important and can easily, be overlooked. The impact on the family will include impact on the spouses and the children and siblings and even close mates. Because sometimes we talk about the family. Family is not the immediate family, but I know we are focusing on the immediate family.
Yeah.
So on the spouses, on the children, on siblings, the immediate family that we can talk about.
Yeah.
What's important to know is that people around the sufferer often don't know what to do or how to help, and because the sufferer, as I mentioned earlier on, is frequently irritable and easily frustrated, with low frustration tolerance, friends and families are constantly working on eggshells around the sufferer. Spouses and children feel frequently ignored. The emotional impact can also be on the children. Spouses also experience the huge emotional impact of from the sufferer, from who is, or from the person suffering from depression. And when the sufferer is experiencing some of these impacts, because the sufferer, it's not like people don't care, but it might appear that the sufferer doesn't care about the family anymore. And because the sufferer sees family going through these difficult times, it begins to heighten their own sense of guilt.
Yeah.
Because they know they are not performing. They feel, they are aware that I'm not performing as good as I used to be for my spouse, for my children, for my immediate, family. And in certain instances, this could lead onto arguments in the family. It could lead to tension in the home. Some of the children end up taking responsibility of being a carer, and they start taking care of their parents. And this, you can see how this can affect the schooling or education of children who take on a carer's role within the family. In the younger children, or in much families with much younger age children, some of the children start, acting up and started getting involved in mischief. And some start going wayward or begin to seek, affection outside of the home. Some spouses may take to drinking, and sometimes some spouses go on, or things could develop into infidelity. And this could have devastating impact on the family and the children and the wider society, as a whole. So on the family, you can see that the impact on the family can be far-reaching and quite significant as well. Thank you.
Now, depression, I believe, is not a condition we need to take lightly at all. I think it's important that everybody is aware of these things so that we can help each other out. And in a few sentences, can you just summarize what we've discussed so far, Dan?
Yeah. No, thank you very much. And it's really nice meeting with you to have this discussion and to kind of highlight some of the key things about depression that, will help all of us to understand the illness as it presents. So far, we have been talking about depression as an illness. We say depression as an illness. It's not just a passing low mood, but it is other symptoms in addition to the low mood. But then it also begins to have significant impact on the functioning or day-to-day function of the individual. We've also talked about some of the symptoms of depression. We talked about, some of the probable risk factors. As I mentioned, we cannot talk about causes, but we'll talk about risk factors that are linked to depression. And we have mentioned quite a number of those, risk factors. We've also talked about the impact on the sufferer, as a whole. And from what we've discussed so far, the impact on the sufferer can be far-reaching. It's also important that the impact depends on the severity, of the presentation. And so it's important that as we get to understand the illness, I believe that this is going to help us in how to support the sufferers. And as believers or as Christians, understanding this, should also help us in how the Christian family should also move on to being able to support the sufferers and helping them to go, working with them while it's going through,
very important
an illness, which is a very severe form of an illness. So thank you, and very nice having this chat with you.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you.
Hello, hi, Dr. Lawrence Aduwat, and welcome to this part of the program. We now want to look at the survey and its findings and see what we learned from that. So could you please now give us a brief background on the survey findings?
Thank you very much, Pastor Sam, and thank you for the opportunity to share this. You would have heard about the Mental Health in Churches Awareness Project from other parts of the podcast. And at the start, we felt it would be useful to have an idea of the knowledge and perceptions regarding mental health in Christians attending churches in the UK.
Right.
We wanted to know what the level of need was, what was being done by churches in relation to mental health. We did the usual of designing, pre-testing, piloting, And then we distributed a link to an online Microsoft Forms questionnaire, mainly through WhatsApp groups and other social media. And before I go into any detail, I would like to thank all those who responded or forwarded the survey.
Right.
I felt we got a very good response. There were about 200 responses over 4 months.
Right.
And we really appreciate everyone who was involved in any way or form. Now, the survey itself, we decided to target adult Christians over the age of 18.
Right.
And we had an introduction explaining that and giving our names and why we were doing the survey.
Right.
The questions at the start were to do with the usual things like age, sex, ethnicity, role in the church. And we also wanted to know what was the majority ethnic group in the person's church.
Right.
Now, you know, mental health is a very big topic.
Yeah, that's right.
So for this survey, we decided to focus on anxiety, depression, and mental stress because we felt they are more common and easily identifiable than other more complex mental health problems. And to avoid focusing on the respondents' own problems, we asked a question on how confident they will be in recognizing that a fellow church member was suffering from any of these problems.
Right.
We are also interested in finding out the role of the church as perceived by the church members. So we asked if they felt enough was being done in their church to support church members who are having difficulties in relation to any of the mental health issues I mentioned.
That's right.
And we also gave them the opportunity to give reasons for their answer in a free text response.
Right.
Interestingly, a few of these free text responses, including personal experiences which we are not asked for and which could be perceived as positive or negative.
Right.
We also wanted to see if there was any formal training being provided in their church. So we asked a question about that. And we're looking for examples of good practice that could be shared.
Right.
And one big area that we could not ignore was causes of mental ill health.
Right.
So we asked people to list some of the reasons why Christians experience mental health problems. And we asked respondents to suggest what support other Christians and the church can provide. The final question was a bit of a long question which took a while to frame correctly, but we asked them if they thought the culture in their church promoted or hindered recognition and recovery for sufferers of anxiety and depression.
Right.
To give reasons for the answer. So those were the main things that we asked about.
Right. So in the end, when analyzing your findings, what were the main respondents that participated in your survey?
Yes, so before I go on to that, because we are getting to numbers and stuff, and there might be some statisticians listening in, I want to clearly state that we know our sample was not a random sample.
Right.
You can describe it as convenience sampling or snowball sampling,
but
was really mainly through virtual social media networks and referral from one person to the other.
Right.
And I think we need to get that out of the way before we go on. Keeping this in mind, it means we don't know which specific churches the respondents attend.
Right.
We don't know how many came from a particular church.
Right.
We don't know how many are from England, Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland, but we only ask that they should be attending a church in the UK.
Right.
And this will certainly introduce what we call bias in our findings, and we accept that. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the majority of the respondents were female, African ethnicity, and between 31 and 64 years.
Right.
75% were female. The age groupings we chose were 18 to 30, 31 to 49, 50 to 64, and 65 years and older.
Right.
And for the age groupings, 80% came from 31 to 49 and 50 to 64, with almost split equally between the two groups.
Right.
Ethnicity-wise, 80% were of African ethnicity, 16% were white, 3% were Caribbean because we asked about that having an African bias, and 3% were of other ethnic groups.
Right.
Then there's a question about what the majority ethnic group in the church was. 57% of the respondents attended a church where the majority ethnic group was African. And for 30%, the majority ethnic group in their church was white. And the rest were other ethnic groups. We also thought we might want to see whether the church role affected the person's perception.
Right.
So we asked what their role in the church was. And we were lucky to get a wide range of respondents, from pastors and elders to Christians who only attend church occasionally.
Right. Thank you so much. So now if we could look at the key findings that you found in your survey?
Thank you very much. So the main thing was focused on knowledge and perception,
Right.
with some aspects of support and training also being looked at. It appeared most of the people who responded knew about mental health conditions of anxiety, depression, and mental stress. 88% said they felt they knew a moderate amount to a great deal about these conditions.
Right.
Okay. The support issue was a bit split. So when we asked whether they felt enough support was being provided by their church, 32% said yes, 42% said no, and 26% said they didn't know.
Yeah.
So about a third were quite confident that there was enough support being provided by their church. Now, when I look at that group who said yes, most of them, their comments said they had access to a pastor or other counseling support.
Right.
For the people who said no, the common reasons that they gave was that mental health issues were ignored or not discussed in their church, and they use words like taboo and stigma in their responses.
Right.
The training issue, the percentage was a bit low. We don't know whether maybe it's because people were not aware, but less than 10% were aware of activities with the purpose of training in recognition and support of mental well-being in their church.
Right.
So that is what the people who knew that there was training available. The next thing was to do with the causes of mental ill health. And one of the main things that came out in that question was that most people said that Christians are not immune to mental health issues,
Right.
and they are going to get like other people. And they gave a variety of other reasons, and most of them could be grouped in about 8 or 9 broad themes, which I'll go through.
Right.
Common one was financial. People mentioned things like debts. Some people actually mentioned tithes as a
Right.
cause of financial pressure, which can lead to mental ill health. Some mentioned unemployment and housing. The other big one was family and relationships, including marriage and divorce and children and childcare and things like that. The next one was physical ill health.
Yeah.
People mentioned chronic disease and disease like cancer, which can lead to mental ill health. The workplace also frequently came up, and people talked of pressure and stress at work. But people also mentioned discrimination
Right.
as a problem on what that can lead to mental ill health.
Sure.
The rest were less common, but also came up a few times. There was bereavement and loneliness.
Right.
There was traumatic experiences and troubled background. There was addiction with drugs and alcohol.
Right.
And there were also issues regarding stigma, denial, and being unable to recognize mental health. So those are the main groups that people felt were the causes of mental health among Christians attending churches in the UK.
Surely. Thank you. And I think you mentioned earlier that probably there were some who thought some of the factors were spiritual.
Yes.
Would you want to give us some information on what you found in this aspect?
Common, but it came up, and there were interesting issues which I think we could drill them down. But what we got from the survey was that some people felt that Christians who dwell on earthly things rather than God, lack of faith, taking our eyes off Jesus, can lead to mental ill health. Another big thing was thing that was mentioned was demonic harassment, and people felt mental health was a spiritual attack from Satan.
Right.
Then there was a problem of abuse in churches, and people mentioned things like manipulation and coercion, which can cause mental ill health in church members. Unanswered prayer also came up, that when people's prayer are not answered, people felt it could lead to mental ill health. And then there was sin and guilt. So those were not very frequent, but they came up occasionally in the survey responses.
Yeah. All right. So far what we found here is that we get the idea that people felt there were causes to all these things. But could we look at some of the emotional and mental causes that they mentioned as well?
Well, I think the emotional things did not come up strongly in people mentioning the causes.
Right.
I think probably my understanding is that maybe these issues they mentioned lead to the emotional issues, and if they're not dealt with well, they might lead to mental health. But that's just my conclusion of it. We didn't really explore emotion and feelings too much in our survey.
Right.
But what we did ask was the effect of the church culture.
All right.
We have a specific question about that. Whether they felt the culture in their church hinders or promotes recognition and recovery of anxiety and depression.
All right.
Yes, that's the church environment. And that I was not expecting the responses I got.
Right.
About a third of them felt that the culture in their church promotes recognition and recovery.
Right.
But about 20% of faith feels that the culture in their church actually hinders recognition and recovery. And the large majority were not sure, which is close to 50% were not sure.
Right.
And there were various reasons given, but it was a kind of a mishmash, which we'll probably have to look into that data in more detail.
All right. Yeah. So, so maybe with your further programs, you're going to be looking at how this culture affects or hinders and support people.
Yes, I think so. I think that these surveys inform for us to do something about.
Right.
So my thinking is once the initial these podcasts come out,
Yes.
we'll distribute as much as possible and then resurvey and explore some of those issues that have come up.
Right.
Like why do people think the church hinders recognition and recovery? We can look through some of the responses and ask specifically about whether people think this yes or no,
Right.
and then get more data that way if we are able to keep this project going.
All right, then that's fine. Then that will be helpful for us to know the very specific coaches that support and those that do not. All right, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And I think this is very interesting to all of us. I hope that we could do something with the findings that we've got now. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we come to that extra challenge of being depressed when you are a Christian. So I'll just leave this open for you to just talk to me about it.
Well, first of all, I was a leader in various departments in the church, and I felt very ashamed that as a leader, I was going through this rough patch in my life. I was the one supposed to be encouraging others. I wanted to stay away from church most of the time, to hide away from everything, so people don't see me the way I was. When I did go to church, which was mainly to please my husband, I never paid attention to the way I dressed, which was very much unlike me. I was in the choir, but I wasn't in my right frame of mind to lead in the choir. So I took a back seat, and it felt like people were judging me or judging the level of faith I had. I used to ask myself why I was just going through this if Jesus really loved me.
Okay, so you doubted, Jesus's love for you, which actually is the fundamental thing with the Christian faith.
That's
it
right.
comes from the love of
Yes.
God, which was expressed through Christ. Yes, okay. So do you think people picked up on the fact that you were depressed in the church environment?
I'm sure they did. I had people come to me after church service with words of encouragement after, like I said, after service, even though they did not know exactly what was going on.
And did any of them mention, again, the words low mood? We've noticed you are depressed, use the terminology.
Yes, there was one lady in the church who I believe she might be in the health profession who said to me, yes, with these symptoms, I think you have depression. And I opened up to her.
Okay. So tell us about any support you received from the church.
I was very blessed to be in a church who with a pastor who was very caring. It's relatively a small church, but the pastor noticed what I was going through. He had a series of times when we had to go and see him for prayer sessions.
Is this you and your family?
Sometimes on my own, sometimes with my husband.
Oh.
And he actually organized a separate prayer session on a different day, not on a Sunday, where we would go to his office and we will have long sessions of prayer together. He understood when I requested to step down from some of the leadership roles, and also confided in one of the members of the church who was constantly checking on me and gave me a few contacts and access to counseling sessions. I specifically remember her encouraging me not to quit my job because there was always help available.
That's really great, isn't it? That you got all the support from your church, you know, even being encouraged about work, which has nothing to do with church really. So I'm sure you felt quite well supported that way. Okay, all right. Okay, so I come to a controversial question, okay, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Did you see what was happening to you as a medical condition or a spiritual condition?
I really thought this was a spiritual attack on my life, because as a Christian, I wasn't ignorant of the fact that the devil has devices, and he came to steal, to kill, and destroy. But that Jesus came to give us life and give it more abundantly. But I still felt like, why was God allowing me to go through this if he really loved me? And that kept ringing in my mind.
Okay, okay. So was this to begin with that you felt it was more spiritual? Did you at any point think, oh?
In the beginning, I felt it was more spiritual. But yes, later I knew when I started the medications and things started getting better, I knew there was a physical part to it.
Oh, well, Melody, you have been brilliant in this project, and we appreciate your presence and allowing us the rare opportunity of listening to your story. God truly bless you, and may he continue to grant wisdom to your church leaders and all the health professionals that get involved, you know, in your care. May you find mercy and healing by continuing to trust in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Oh, hello, hi, Dr. Daniel Bullet. Welcome to this session.
Hi, Pastor Sam. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at what the general causes and outcomes of depression is now. And because this is your area of specialty, could you please help us with that?
Thank you very much, Pastor Sam. Some people get, you know, in terms of the general presentation or outcome, some people get one single episode which settle with help or sometimes without help.
Right.
And some people after that one episode never get depressed again.
Right.
The general understanding is what we call the rule of 1/3.
Right.
What we know is that about 1/3 of people will fall into this group, those who get one single episode of depression
Right.
and recover completely without any further episodes,
Right.
and they get well and move on with their life. Then another 1/3 of people go through what we call relapses and remissions.
Right.
So they get ill, they get treated, but then get back to functioning okay,
Right.
but then they get ill again,
Right.
and then they respond to treatment again. You know, so about 1/3 of people will go through, you know,
Those
illnesses and relapses and remissions and relapses and remissions.
Right.
Then the last 1/3 are those who get an illness and the illness become chronic. It
Right.
goes on. You might try many treatments. They might improve a little bit, but the illness rarely goes away, and they become more like chronic, you know, sufferers.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they don't improve at all. But the illness really kind of takes its toll
Right.
on them and becomes more chronic or
Right.
long lasting. So that is kind of broadly, you know, how in terms of response or outcome. That is our understanding of how that presents.
Right.
Depression is a very serious illness, and in some cases, suicide is an outcome.
Right.
And this suicide is normally linked to the sense of despair and hopelessness.
Right.
And these are part of the core symptoms in severe depression.
Right.
And sometimes when people don't get the right help,
Yes.
they unfortunately go on to commit suicide.
Right.
And that is one of the things that I believe as Christians can have really devastating impact,
Right.
on the family and friends and society at large.
Right.
And if myself as a psychiatrist, it's one of the things that I always dread and something that I wish never happens
Right.
to any of my patients.
Yeah.
And hence important to really, get in there to provide every help that is needed, so that people don't go on, to kill themselves.
Right.
Some will call suicide a very selfish act, which is what it appears on the surface to be.
Right.
But I think that people who are driven to killing themselves must have hit really rock bottom
Yes.
despair to be driven, to those ends.
Right.
It's important to know that the God we serve as Christians is a God who cares
Right.
about all of us, both in times of need,
Right.
and whilst going through difficulties.
Sure. Thank you so much. That was quite succinct, but with a lot of detail in there. Now, could you please just let us know what could be some of the initial treatments for depression?
So the type of treatment for depression depends on the severity.
Right.
Okay. So in my earlier discussion, I talk about depression can be broken down to mild, moderate, and severe.
Right.
Okay. And the symptoms of severe and mild, is an extension, or these symptoms, the severe end of the spectrum, symptoms have a huge impact on the
Yes.
person, and people frequently, cease to function.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So the type of treatment that is given depends on the severity of the symptom.
Yeah.
Okay. In mild depression, people just getting support from family, from close friends, some help, self-help, some counseling, supportive counseling, support from family's friends, opening up to letting people know, are all very important.
Right.
In helping to improve the depression.
Yeah.
Okay. At the mild end also, one of the key treatment that we recommend is psychological therapy.
Right.
And if you take the NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence,
Right.
they almost always recommend that for mild depression, medication is not needed.
Right.
It is predominantly psychological therapy. When you take moderate depression, talking or psychological therapy should be also the first line of treatment,
Right.
to be offered. And it's only when, talking therapy is not helping to improve symptoms that you think that there should be other treatment, modalities. And sometimes we might recommend medication.
Right.
But as I mentioned, talking therapy should be tried to a good bit to make sure that it's been tried and it's not working before you think about adding something else.
Right.
But in severe depression, almost always you need adjunctive, or in addition to talking therapy, you also need medication in addition to the talking therapy.
Right.
In terms of, I mentioned self-help.
Yes.
Self-help, things like your, activity scheduling,
Right.
your sleeping time, sleeping hygiene practices. Exercising has been known to be very good as a self-help thing.
Yeah.
Now, I would like to explain that. It is known that when people exercise stimulates some chemicals in the brain, which you call the endorphins or happy chemicals, that then go on to help improve our mood.
Sure.
And that is where when you go for a very good, powerful power walk, you come back feeling quite good about yourself. These are chemicals that are released, within the brain. And other things that we recommend as self-help are mindfulness techniques about, just going out of your immediate self and beginning to appreciate or move your focus from yourself onto your environment. Begin to noticing things that are going on around you. All of those things are known, to help. Now, in terms of psychological therapy, examples of psychological therapy common one is cognitive behavior therapy, what we call CBT.
Right.
We have also mindfulness therapy. We have IPT, which we call the interpersonal therapy. And then we have other therapies like systemic psychotherapy and sometimes psychodynamic psychotherapy
Right.
are all known to be, to have a role in terms of psychological therapies. Medications, we have various kinds of medications which are used to treat depression.
Yeah.
And we have, based upon the presentation, we always, there is, we talk of first line of treatment,
Yeah.
second line of treatment, third line of treatment. The first line is the first medication that you're going to offer.
Yeah.
And this belongs to a certain class of medications. And if that fails, you try something else and then you try something else.
Right.
It's always important that medication alone is not enough.
Right.
And it's always important to combine in severe depression medication with psychological therapy.
Therapy. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. We know you are an expert in the area. We will expect that the church should be able to help. In what ways do you think the church can actually help?
Right. Before we come to I think in trying to talk about this,
Yeah.
I want to kind of digress a little bit.
Right.
To talk about why people suffer in silence.
All right. That's
Because
I think that's
in-
a good question. Yeah.
In
That's
the
a good
body in a church,
Yes.
sometimes because of the stigma that is associated with depression,
Right.
people keep it to themselves. They don't want anybody to know. They feel people will judge them.
Right.
They feel people will feel you are depressed because of a sin you have committed, and
Yeah,
all of
sure.
those things. So that stigma makes people to suffer in silence. They keep the illness, to themselves.
Right.
And especially back home in Africa, depression may be considered a taboo.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
for people to know that you are suffering from depression.
Yeah.
Some may perceive it as a lack of faith
Yes.
or low spirituality. And in Western world, now things have moved on,
Yeah.
in a long way, and in the right direction, where sufferers, come out readily and
Yeah.
people are getting help, in good time.
Yes.
And therefore, I want to say that what I would say is, for those of us who come from Black ethnic minority origin,
Yes.
this issue of stigma can still be a problem,
Yeah.
for us.
Right.
And I really want to kind of encourage that when people are going through depression,
Yeah.
we should,
Rather
know
support
about
them.
it
Yes.
and provide help in good time and support the people to come through it.
All right.
The other reason why people suffer in silence is that sometimes in the body of Christ, the issue of confidentiality.
Right.
Okay. Sometimes somebody talks about they having an illness, and before long, other people are talking about it all over the place.
Right.
That, do you know about that brother? He has depression, or that sister, he has depression.
Yeah.
And we break the confidentiality of these people.
Yeah.
And therefore, fear of people sometimes knowing that their story will be out there
Yeah.
makes them to suffer in silence and
Sure.
keeping themselves to themselves.
Sure.
There's a joke way back home that some way of breaking confidentiality
Yeah.
is where somebody say, brother, let's pray for Sister B.
Yes.
Because Sister B is not doing well at all. This is, and they bring it as if it's a prayer topic.
Right.
But it is still breaking somebody's confidence.
okay,
And we,
yeah.
as the body of Christ, we need to be cautious.
That's right. That's
About
right.
this. And then a sense of feeling dejections.
Yes.
And people suffer so because they feel nobody really cares, nobody wants to know. I have to keep this a secret, to myself, and therefore they tend to suffer, in silence.
Right.
Yeah. And then you talk about how can the church help?
Yes.
What can we do when one is going through, depression? The key things I want to say is that we need awareness.
Yes.
We need understanding and the knowledge of the illness
Right.
as the basic starting point.
Yes.
Because without this, you cannot, know how to help.
Right.
And oftentimes people find themselves quite, struggling or confused of how to help. There's a passage in the book of Hosea, chapter 4, verse 6, which says, my people perish for lack of knowledge.
Sure.
So understanding knowledge and awareness
Yes.
is hugely important. The church and the body of Christ need to seek out and to learn about these things so that we can best support our brothers and sisters
Yeah.
who go through emotional, difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was quite detailed, and I hope the church will take lessons from this. If we could look at any other ways of treating depression and some of the other mental health problems that we have in church, is there any additional information you could provide us with? Yeah.
Okay. In terms of how we can help, depression can affect the Christian
Right.
in other dimensions.
Yes.
You know, one, the sufferer begins to feel that, am I suffering from this condition because I have fallen out with God, because my relationship with God has gone down?
Yeah.
And in talking about help, these are all important, because it's always important to understand where that person is coming from.
Right.
So in trying to help, it's about exploring to understand what are the links to this sufferer's presentation. And for the sufferer, sometimes God feels very far away. And therefore, in trying to help, some people begin to feel that does God even really exist?
Right.
And therefore, in trying to help, is trying to being able to tease out these things within the discussion. People feel guilty. Depression itself can present with guilt feelings. But for the believer, people can begin to have guilt feelings about their past, which then dominate their lives, whether they have committed sin, and this could be guilt about sins of omission and commission. Some people could become preoccupied with being punished by God, for their sins. In short, the sufferer loses their joy. Why am I putting this all here and now? These are all important so that in trying to help, you don't just jump in, but you have to come in with an understanding of the issues that the person is struggling with. Okay. In trying to help, the first thing that I want to comment on, as I mentioned, is about the knowledge. The church needs to educate ourselves. It's important that we educate ourselves, and this should not be, left to pastors or specific people. I think the church members at large need to be educated on what depression is and how it affects people. But then we will want to focus on the pastors and lay people, and leaders of the church need to be equipped with teaching seminars and workshops to help them understand what depression is. Because if the person does not understand, there's no way they can then help, to provide Christian counseling, to these people. And therefore, every church, I believe, needs to create a broad-based resource or a resource base of people who, when people are going through depression, can call on or can fall on or can be directed to. To be able to then start helping the people. And the knowledge of those people should also extend to the point that the people helping should also know their limits. That, I can help up to this point. And when I have reached my limit, I need to ask for specialized help. That's also hugely important. And therefore, it's important that, and I'm hoping that as part of this project, we're going to make available some resources. We're going to do some signposting resources, that are out there. What the church can do, oftentimes we are too busy. Christians, we are too busy, and therefore we don't notice. We don't take that personal interest in people. We are preoccupied with many things. And to the extent that people going through emotional difficulties sometimes feel like nobody really cares, and they feel overwhelmed by what is going on. And because they feel like nobody cares, the best thing is to withdraw to themselves and just keep themselves to themselves. Okay, so the body of Christ must learn to look after each other. And we'll have to learn to depend on each other. So two things. From the point of the sufferer, the sufferer needs to begin to open up to the body, to letting people know, because it's only when people know that they can provide the requisite help. And then the other, for the rest, the non-sufferers, is also looking out for each other. When we feel that sister might be going through something.
Yeah.
Just a nice way approaching, say, sister, is everything okay? I notice you're not looking yourself, might help to open up a conversation.
Right.
For people to then open up about some of the things that they are going through. The other things that the church can do is learning how to walk beside the sufferer.
Right.
Frequently, when people are going through depression and people want to help, they go in to give advice. They go in to kind of make recommendation of what they think might work.
Right.
Sometimes all the sufferer needs is somebody just to listen without saying anything.
Sure.
Sometimes holding hands with the sufferer, praying with them, working with them, studying the word of God with them, encouraging them, providing a listening ear. It's all that they need. So don't go in if you are not trained to go and be offering advice in things that you are not sure about. Sometimes your presence and availability is extremely valuable. One of the things I always say, if you read the story of Job,
Yes.
I strongly believe that the first is it week or 7 days where they sat with Job and said nothing was the most profitable bit of what they did.
That's right.
And you can see that as soon as they opened their mouth, they made his pain more difficult. And this is something I have learned over time. That sometimes just being silent and just listening and supporting somebody, is more than 1,000 words, that you can offer. Important to know when to help, when to give advice, and when to ask for formal help, as I've mentioned, is also, very, very, important. Hi, Pastor Sam. It's good to see you again.
Hello.
The last time we met, you kind of questioned me quite a bit. I think today it's going to be the other way around. So what I want to check is, we have been exposed to depression as it presents, and then impact on the sufferer, and especially as a Christian, and then also what the church can do. What I want to find out is there any other things that, from your experience and practice as a pastor, are there any kind of additions or experiences that you want to share to highlight some of these things that we have talked about, please?
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dr. Daniel, and for welcoming me to this part of the program. As you know, there is the belief that because Jesus came to die for all, and the Bible tells us and gives us many assurances of healing, a Christian getting sick is frowned on as a stigma and a condemnation. And this has gone on for many centuries. And we know that actually such attitudes rather are unacceptable, because no matter the case, we've been admonished from the Bible to show kindness, love, and support to those in need. But then this is what we have to do with every day. So those are the things that I've seen. And then again, what we are also finding now is that because of all these promises, people then think that the moment you get sick, then it's because of sin, sickness, or Satan attack. And people believe that Jesus came to overcome all these things. So if you become sick, then there's a problem. But what people actually forget is that in the Bible, Paul himself talked about a thorn in his flesh, which we now know was a kind of a sickness. We know Paul himself was actually praying for the sick to be healed, but then he is talking about a sickness here. And then we also know about even Dorcas, the young girl who was so kind and generous, and he got unwell to the point that she even died. We know of even Epaphroditus who worked with Paul, and Paul actually said he became very ill for his concern for the church. So actually people even found that because of the too much concern, maybe he was depressed, he was stressed in many ways. So actually these things are not just new in our day. And also what we all found is that the book of James 5:14 tells us that, is anyone among you sick? which gives an implication that even in the church, there's an expectation that somebody can get sick. And then what he said is that if someone got sick, they should call the elders and pray over the person and anoint the person, and the prayer offered in faith will heal the sick. And so actually what we're supposed to do in terms of people not being well in the church is to pray for them, support them, show love and kindness rather than the condemnation.
Yes.
But I mean, over the years, research in this area has also shown the reason why people do this is that the second part of this same verse says, if the person has sinned, then he'll be forgiven. So people then assume that all sickness is as a result of a sin of a kind, which actually is completely wrong. And also, as we know, undoubtedly, the Bible talks about and gives us many verses where it then shows that we must know that Christians can get sick, meaning that sickness of any type among Christians should then not be seen as a curse. You know, people think when you're sick, then it's because you've come under a curse. And obviously, I have been sick many times, and I've checked with the Holy Spirit to look in my life to see whether it was an attack. But obviously, as probably you know now, I do so many things, and I don't look after myself very well. God gave us this body for us to look after it. If you don't look after it, you will get sick. So it's not about a demon always. I know demons can cause sickness. It's not about sin. Yet we know sin can cause a sickness, but actually that's not all that there is. And also there has been a lot of research these days where we know that people can get self-help through, or people can get sick. Let me start from that before we go to the self-help. Just because literally we're not having the right nutrition, we're not sleeping well and all this. But church seems to just completely ignore this. And I've known of pastors who have actually gone to the extent of killing themselves. They were so depressed, they have to kill themselves. I think this was in the news and many of us really know. So it's really ironic and very hypocritical that we judge and stigmatize when people get sick instead of forgiving and praying for them and looking forward to their well-being. Yeah. So again, probably there are many more that we can talk about that we need to know. We need to also know that research in these days have shown that prayer and many other forms can be helpful, but we've always cautioned that people have got to be careful not to over rely on prayer. Because some of the things is just having sleep, eating well, becoming hydrated, and you're well. Because as you know, as a doctor, many migraines and headaches can be solved easily by a simple sleep and actually having enough hydration, eating well, and actually joining a group and having fun. You know, but these things are not really mentioned. We only look at the negative part of the whole thing. So in my practice as a pastor, I would say, I've gone to places that I've seen people just casting out demons, whilst in actual fact, by the word of knowledge, you know, there is no demon. You know, so we're just wasting our time praying. And I think there is a researcher called Duncan who has actually come out to say, yes, Christians and their leaders resort to prayer normally as the first point of attempt. And in many instances, they've seen that there is healing that has come, mainly because of the relaxation response that is elicited through prayer and by the hormones within our systems that really make people relax and have a sense of and feeling of hope, gratitude, and compassion, which all these they found has contributed to the well-being of people who may be depressed, have headaches, or psychotic in some cases. But they've always cautioned that we got to be cautious and not to over rely only on prayer. Prayer.
I think
yes,
I like the bit about I like that emphasis of you're not saying prayer is not important,
yes,
but we're not saying prayer is the sole answer either.
Yeah.
I think that is a very important point, you know, to highlight. Yeah, prayer in the life of the Christian is hugely important,
Yes.
but it is not the sole thing. And that in addition to prayer,
Yes.
you need to do what you also have to do
Yes.
in those
Yes,
dimensions. I
in
think that's a
terms
very
of-
useful point to emphasize. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And in terms of eating and all that, because I believe, and actually there was another research which was quite fascinating, looking at how people even feed themselves in the church on Sundays. Then what we've also found is that there is what is called religious coping, or in a sense, it's a form of counseling and mentoring. And what they found is that one of the psychologists, again in America, in 2010 reviewed that positive religious coping or counseling, for example, benevolent appraisal. People just go to a brother, a sister in the church, a senior person, maybe yourself being a specialist in psychiatry, but still in church. People just come to you, know you in your role as a psychiatrist. But again, just that with a brother who has the knowledge, for them to see whether things are okay, what have they been doing that has resulted in mental health difficulties, or in cases where the pastors are knowledgeable to be able to give them counseling and again helping. But also people who are in groups, churches have very small groups sometimes. And when people join, say, the men's group, the women's group, they go out and they found that the problem that they're going through is not only particular in their case, but with everybody. Then they could then have a discussion, share ideas, and that then helps them to really cope very well with depression and all the other things that we've been talking about. There is also the other thing that is come on now, which is the declaration of faith. To many Christians, faith is considered a complete trust or confidence in God, and have that strong belief in the doctrines of religion. And then what we also found is that there's a gentleman called Mo, and he came out also with a research talking about the surprise links between faith and health. Mm-hmm. And he found that people who usually have faith in a supreme being, whom he called God, helps them to heal well. And it's all because it helps them to have a positive view that life may be difficult now, but life could be better tomorrow. And so that has also been one of the things that has been linked to better health. So people read the Bible verses and believe that if God is true and God has made promises and God has done it for other people, then God could do it for them. And this generous optimism, it enriches their interpersonal relationships and actually creates a support system and enhances the quality of life that they have. And actually, this is known to be supported with other scientific research, which demonstrates that there is a connection between religiousness and improved health. And this is documented in many research documents.
I think in my line of work, the research evidence, like you rightly said,
yes,
will go to support that people with religious belief, have a better outcome,
yes,
from a depressive illness or an episode.
Right.
And that is about that trust and dependence on God, knowing that you can do this on your own, knowing that there is somebody who is looking after you, knowing that you can cast your cares on your maker. Yes. I think all of those things have a huge role. So what you're saying, I've also come across that.
Excellent. Interesting. And then the other thing that we've also seen is meditation, Christian meditation, which is not quite mentioned a lot. So things like people doing their quiet time, reading the Bible, and believing that God could speak to them through the Bible, and reflecting on what they have read, which is a form of meditation, has been known to be very helpful. And actually, meditation has been practiced by other religious groups as well. But in the Christian field, it's shown that having some form of meditation helps people to improve on life obstacles, because they generate this energy. They understand that life can be difficult, but they also believe that many people have gone through life challenges and have come out even better.
Yeah.
So instead of seeing these situations like stress, depression, or even psychosis as a big problem, they see it as an obstacle which is come and it will eventually pass. Yeah. And that hopefulness really helps people to actually overcome.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's important, I think, in talking to some of the young people in my church where I go to, and recently we're talking about meditation, and it's always important to kind of, yes, other religions do have meditation, but if you look at other religions like the transcendental meditation or Eastern type meditation, Buddhism, etc., what their meditation is about emptying your mind. Okay? Christian meditation is something different. We fill our minds with the gospel of Christ, with the good news. So our meditation is based upon scripture and upon meditating on the power of the Holy Spirit, meditate on the holiness of God. And so as Christians, our meditation, I was telling the young people, is slightly different from, we don't empty our minds, we rather fill our minds with the goodness of God. And so just to kind of add to the point you're making, and it has a very useful role to play.
And that's a clear description of the differences. And actually what happens that we've also seen that people in meditating go a bit further to do journaling, just jotting down things. And this is known to actually strengthen the immune cells and then the T lymphocytes, I mean, as biologists. And that has been associated with a drop in depression, anxiety, and actually it increases a person's positive mood, social engagement. Like you were saying the other time, when people exercise, you know, the happy hormones that are released and they come out energized. And it's known that all these things, exercising your mind and actually exercising in a way of filling it with positive messages, really go a long way to make people feel very great about themselves and are able then to endure stress and depression. So one of the other things is that we will also know about worship, particularly collective worship, and actually people singing songs and raising their hands and doing all sorts of things really has been seen to be very, very helpful to people, because in that sense they actually know that there is a supreme God who is going to take care of their needs. And as they do that, I think it helps them to shift their mind off the problem, not emptying their mind, but shift their mind of the problem onto God, who is able to actually help them. Because what we know is that stress and depression and feeling low moods and all that is all about all the negative things that come into people's mind. So when our mind is diverted from the negative thing onto God, which is a positive thing that we do, it's known that it does really help to cut down on depression and stress. And that's, we know, it's good that we were looking at the black people and black churches, and it's actually known that blacks more likely than white people worship God in a very expressive way.
That's true.
Yes, and I think it's noted that because they do that, it has really helped them a lot. And that is the reason why, although we have suicide cases, although amongst all the ethnic groups, but it's quite lower, I think in some sense, in many black communities than the other groups, because the practice of singing, you know, because worship involving the practice of singing and listening to music rather motivates people instead of putting them down. So it then comes to the point where the other thing where there is singing and dancing in church and people are dancing. It's a physical exercise, but again, it's done in a different way than walking around and going to the park.
I like that.
Yeah, so people actually come to church and they can have a good dance and keep fit to the extent that they may probably not even need to go to the gym. But we find that these are very interesting things. And all these have been proven by research. Because there's a gentleman, a professor called Welch, and in 2015, he came out with a research that really showed that the cardiovascular fitness included in the lung functioning, which helps to improve people's mood as they dance, has been proven to be very, very useful. And they actually did a research in church. In fact, in churches where people are allowed to sing praises and worship and dance, end up being more fit, more happier than churches where more or less it is always the hymn and the low-key songs.
You are not in that way talking about against hymns.
No,
not.
no, the hymns are, some of the hymns are much beneficial, and actually these days we are very happy
I'll tell you why I interjected that.
That's right.
My wife loves hymns.
Excellent.
And if she should get any remotest idea that you're speaking against hymns,
Yeah.
I will be in trouble. So
Yeah, these are not really against hymns, but it's just a comment. And actually, some of the hymns, the beat actually is even more than some of the reggae songs that we sing in church, you know, and it's a very happy mood to see. Again, I mean, we already talked about groups, but it's also known that the church as a family, because there are many churches that you go and people complain. And I think some of the findings from our research said even the leaders or the pastors may not even know them or notice what is going on. So a church where people are seen as a big family and people are watching over each other is noted to be a very strong source of support for people in terms of stress and depression. And again, what is happening is even in the UK, the mental health of charities and Mind and the Mental Health Foundation have actually done a research, and they've come out with this, that when there's a family mood in any association and in any group, it then helps to deal with the psychological consequences of stress and the philosophical, actually, sociological, stress, and it helps people to enhance their immune function and helps to reduce mental health problems. So indeed, there are so many researchers out there that have come to proving what we see on day-to-day basis. And as you know, I even had a chance to speak with Melody when she was going through her issues. And we went through these things. It wasn't like, oh, let's pray, God is going to do it, let's do this. Just listening to her alone, I think, was quite enough for her recovery as well. Unlike situations where she told me she'd gone and it's like, oh, go and fast and go and do it. No one is saying fasting and prayers are not important. They are,
right.
But we should not quickly resort to that, because in many times what we found is that even the people in depression, because they can't eat, they even tend to resort to fastings. I know of situations, where people have fasted, they've come out right. But there are situations people have fasted and nothing has happened. God treats us uniquely. And that's the thing that we need to always know.
Important,
listen to God. And the church leaders, we have a role to help our members. And we got to know them individually and see what problems they might be facing. And I think that will be very, very helpful to many of us. Particularly, we should be looking at those with ill health and help to prevent any worsening of their situations. So thank you so much for you.
Thank you.
This opportunity.
Thank you very much for your elaboration or discussion of the Christian dimension to the whole discussion. I found it very, very, very useful. And I will want to say that we are going to, pull some resources, local resources and national resources, which is going to be added to part of our discussion so that people can link in or know where to seek help, when things are needed. But I found that very, very useful, and I'm really grateful for your contribution. Thank you.
My pleasure, Dr. Daniel. Thank you.